And we're looking at one etude, two preludes, and one nocturne. So this first work is an example of a concert etude. And so an etude is a study piece, something that is intended to develop the technical skill of the player. Concert etudes, though, have an artistic purpose, and they are meant to be performed on stage. And so Chopin, in many ways, is regarded as having developed this type of etude. And the one that we're going to listen to is the last of the first set of 12. So Opus 10, number 12. It's in the key of C minor. And this one has the nickname Revolutionary. I mentioned what that had to do with last time. This particular etude is an etude, a study for the left hand. So if you look at the score, you can see that you have continuous left hand 16th notes. The melody is in the right hand, it's in octaves. And this is in a ternary form, but it's based more on the idea of the opening section coming back and having a middle section that's in a contrasting key, rather than having a contrasting B theme. So, very much like a Bach prelude, Chopin takes one idea and continuously develops that. So that's something that's similar. So date of composition is 1831. And this has some typical Chopin characteristics. So, Chopin doesn't indicate pedal markings, but this is a work, and his works in general make a lot of use of the damper pedal. And this starts with an introduction, which is 8 measures long, and then in measure 9, this left-hand etude figure is presented, and that's something which is in the background throughout the etude, and is typical of this type of pattern that would encompass an interval that's larger than an octave. So you see how the left hand goes up 2 octaves and a third, and then measure 10, that interval of a tenth that's going on between the lowest and the highest note in the left hand pattern. So this melody that's presented in measure 10 is restated in measure 20. When it's restated, he writes sotto voce, which is like in a whisper, and it then leads to a big build-up to the downbeat of measure 28, and that's the end of the opening section. And it's shifted, so there's a cadence in B flat major there in measure 28. Measure 29, then it shifts to G sharp minor, and then D sharp, and then F sharp minor, and then C sharp minor. And so it's going around the circle progression. Still basically the same kind of melodic idea and left hand 16th pattern. Then on the next page, it gets to, there's a big arrival at measure 37 on subdominant key on F minor. And then at measure 41, it brings back the introduction. And so that's then leading to this return of the A section. When the melody then comes back in at measure 50 on the next page, if you compare measure 50 with measure 10, you can see how Chopin has added some extra notes and he embellishes the melody when it returns, and so that's a typical characteristic. So he adds some chromatic tones. And he does that for all the return here. So measure 52, you have the same thing in measure 55 and 56. And there at 60, all of those are embellished. The coda begins at measure 65, and it's typical too that these Chopin etudes will have very brilliant coda sections. And it has a real dramatic ending. It has a playful cadence at the end. And this is the end of this whole first set of 12 etudes. All right. Chopin Etudes then develop a new romantic technique, and there are so many new possibilities for writing for the piano that Chopin develops. So they're really important for that as well. Okay, the next two works that we're going to listen to are from the Opus 28 Preludes. Oops, sorry. So these works were written in the late 1830s, and they were written at a point where Chopin had developed an illness which traditionally was described as consumption, which it was the 19th century term for tuberculosis, but some scholars now say that it was cystic fibrosis. But at any rate, he had problems breathing, and his doctors advised him to try to spend more time in a humid climate. So he would spend the summers with his girlfriend, whose name is Aurora Dudevant. He went by the pen name of George Sand. So she was a novelist. They had a 10-year relationship, but never got married. Ended pretty bitterly. But this was during that time. And so they would spend the summers that was called Mallorca. And so the reason I mention this has to do with the nickname of this prelude that we're going to listen to, which is the Raindrop Prelude. And each of these preludes has a nickname that wasn't given by Chopin, but it's just something that's over time developed. And it has to do with the repeated note accompaniment pattern that reminded person of the sound of raindrops that are gently pattering against the window pane. So these preludes are influenced and based on the idea that Bach established in the Well-Tempered Clavier, in that there's one prelude for every major and minor key, but they're arranged differently as far as the order of keys. So there are 24 preludes in total, and now the prelude is just a generic type of character piece. So it doesn't really introduce something like a Baroque prelude would introduce a fugue, but instead they're each little mood pictures. Some of them are as short as 16 measures long. The Raindrop Prelude is one of the longest, and it's number 15 in the set of 24. So the way that Chopin arranges these is according to a circle of fifths. So the first one's in C major, and then the second one is in the relative minor key of A minor, and then G major, E minor, and so forth, and it goes around the sharp keys. And so the last two are in the key of F major and then D minor. And so this is different than the way that the Well-Tempered Clavier is organized, in which that was just chromatically C major, C minor, C sharp major, C sharp minor, and just went up by half step for that. So most of these are very lyrical. A couple of them are more like etudes, and so the second one that we're going to listen to in B flat minor that follows the D flat major Raindrop Prelude is like an etude. So So this is in a compound ternary form, and the middle section is in C sharp minor. So the A section's in D flat major, middle section goes to C sharp minor. That's where you have the big dramatic buildup in the prelude, and you have the climax, and you have a couple of places where that's reached. When the A section returns, it's really abbreviated, so it's just about 10 measures or so, something like that. Let me give you a copy of this. All right, so the B section begins on the second page, and the return of the A sections at measure 76. So the two big buildups occur at measure 40, and then you have it repeated again, measure 56. So you see you have a repeated note pattern that's going on throughout the prelude. That's one thing that kind of ties it all together. This is a good example of this bel canto style, this very lyrical, beautiful singing quality, and it has some light kind of decoration. You see that at the end of the first phrase, at the end of measure 4, where you have 7 notes against 2 notes. Every time that returns, it's a little more chromatic, so that returns to 23, and then at the very end he animates it even more at measure 79, where you have 10 notes in the beat. And this has some chromaticism in it. The opening A section has 3 parts. The first part that begins at the first measure returns at measure 20, and then there's a second part that begins in measure 9, and it touches on some other keys like A flat minor and B flat minor. So when it shifts to C sharp minor for the middle section, then the melody goes down into the bass. And you have that for a couple of phrases leading up to the big climax. Some of the places where you hear some dissonance that's used in a way that's not percussive is like at measure 62. The downbeat there has a D sharp against an E.